Okay, let's go. Number 1. Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. Imagine you're a construction worker in Malta, 1902. You're installing a cistern beneath a new housing block. Your pickaxe swings, hits limestone, and breaks through into empty air. You peer into the hole. Not darkness, a staircase, descending, level after level of carved stone chambers, going down 3 stories into the earth. You've accidentally punched through the roof of one of the oldest ritual spaces on the planet. Nobody called an archaeologist. Not immediately. Construction continued for 2 years. Workers dumped rubble into the chambers below. Bones were scattered, objects removed without documentation. By the time Father Emmanuel Magri and later Themistocles Zamet arrived for formal excavation in 1904, the site had already suffered irreversible damage. What survived was still staggering enough to change what anyone believed about prehistoric religion. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is a subterranean complex carved entirely from solid limestone. Construction dates to between 3600 and 2500 BCE, making it older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramid, built at a time when the people of Malta were Neolithic farmers, with no writing, no metal tools, and no known connection to any complex culture outside the island. 3 underground levels descend 33 feet below the surface. The complex spans approximately 5,382 square feet across 33 interconnected chambers. When archaeologists cataloged what remained of the skeletal material, they counted enough bones to represent approximately 7,000 individuals. That is not a burial ground. That is a depository. Some of the skulls recovered from those chambers were anatomically unusual. Several showed extreme cranial elongation of a kind that standard head-binding practices cannot produce. Head-binding, the technique of wrapping an infant's skull to reshape it during growth, creates elongation but does not increase internal skull volume. These skulls had greater cranial volume than ordinary human skulls. The implication is that the brain inside was larger. They were removed from the site, transferred to the museum in Valletta, documented in photographs and written descriptions by researchers who handled them in person. Then German bombing struck Malta in World War II. The bones were reportedly lost. What remains are photographs, field sketches, and the accounts of the scientists who examined them before they disappeared. The most significant feature of the hypogeum is not the skulls. It is the oracle's room, a small carved alcove with a single rectangular niche, cut precisely into the wall. When a male voice speaks into that niche at a frequency between 95 and 120 Hz, the sound does not simply echo. It reverberates through the entire chamber system in a specific pattern. Researchers Paolo De Bertolis and Niccolo Bisconti measured the resonance in 2012 and found that sustained exposure to the frequencies produced by this room affects the temporal lobes of the human brain. The documented effects include disorientation, visual disturbances, and altered states of consciousness. This is not a side effect of carving. The alcove is precisely shaped to produce this outcome. Acoustic archaeologists Rupert Till and Aaron Watson documented similar deliberate resonance properties at Stonehenge and Newgrange. The hypogeum fits a consistent pattern, megalithic sacred sites engineered to alter the mental state of people inside them. Whoever carved the oracle's room understood, in whatever practical terms they framed it, the relationship between stone geometry, low-frequency sound, and what the human brain does in the dark. They built that relationship into the architecture. 5,500 years ago, Malta's Heritage Trust sealed restricted sections of the hypogeum in 1990. Visitors are allowed only on the upper levels, capped at 80 per day with timed entry to prevent CO2 buildup. The lower chambers, where the bone concentration is densest and the oracle's room resonance is strongest, are permanently closed to the public. The official reason is preservation. But researchers permitted into those lower sections describe something the preservation argument does not explain. The walls of the deepest chamber are covered in red ochre symbols, geometric spirals, and nested circles. Unlike anything found in Malta's known Neolithic artistic tradition above ground, they look older. They suggest a different people, or a different purpose, than the Tarxian temple culture documented at the surface. Mainstream archaeologists interpret the hypogeum as a communal ossuary and ritual center. 7,000 individuals were interred here over centuries as part of a structured mortuary practice. The acoustic properties were either incidental or recognized as an enhancement to ritual experience. The elongated skulls represent either natural anatomical variation or a distinct population subgroup. The red ochre symbols are consistent with broader Mediterranean Neolithic iconography, but the numbers create a problem the mainstream framing doesn't resolve. 7,000 people in 5,382 square feet is not a cemetery. Even across 3 levels, across multiple generations, the concentration exceeds what ordinary burial practice would produce. It resembles a processing facility. And a room that engineers temporal lobe disruption through precisely shaped resonance is not a side effect of architecture. Someone understood the mechanism. Someone designed for the outcome. Some researchers have proposed that the hypogeum functioned as an incubation oracle, a site where selected individuals descended alone into the dark surrounded by the dead, and received visions induced by the resonance and total sensory deprivation. Similar oracular incubation practices are documented in ancient Greece, Egypt, and the Near East. But those practices are documented from around 800 BCE. The hypogeum predates them by nearly 2,800 years. Others have focused on the elongated skulls as evidence of a genetically distinct priestly group, kept separate from the broader Maltese population through generations of intermarriage. If those skulls represent a separate lineage, the question of origin has no current answer. The Maltese temple culture vanished around 2500 BCE with no conquest, no successor culture, no archaeological explanation. The people who built the hypogeum, who engineered its resonance, who deposited 7,000 people in its chambers, simply ceased to appear in the record. Why were 7,000 individuals concentrated in a sealed underground space of barely 5,000 square feet? What was the oracle's room used for, and who was speaking into its walls? Where are the skulls described in detail by researchers before they disappeared in the war? And why does the deepest sealed chamber contain symbols unlike anything from any other Maltese Neolithic site? From the carved limestone depths of Malta, we cross the world to China, where 3,000 years ago, a civilization sealed its most sacred objects into the earth and walked away, leaving behind artifacts that still have no explanation. Number 2. Sangsingdui. In 1929, a farmer digging an irrigation ditch in Guanghan County, Sichuan Province, hid a layer of ancient jade and stone objects. He collected what he could. Archaeologists arrived, conducted a brief survey, and concluded the site was interesting but not urgent. Then they left. For 50 years, one of the most extraordinary Bronze Age civilizations on Earth sat unexcavated, while every history book on ancient China described a neat, linear progression from Yellow River cultures to modern Han civilization. No one knew about Sanxingdui, because no one had gone back. In 1986, workers at a brick factory near the original discovery hit something with a shovel. Not rock, a sealed pit, not a grave, not a trash deposit. A ritual deposit filled with objects so strange that Chinese archaeologists called to the scene were initially uncertain what they were looking at. The Sangsingdui culture occupied the Chengdu Plain of what is now Sichuan Province, dating from approximately 2800 to 1000 BCE. It runs parallel in time to the Shang dynasty, the civilization mainstream Chinese history identifies as the foundational culture, but Sangsingdui shares nothing with the Shang. No similar bronze casting style. No similar burial practices, no oracle bones, no ancestral veneration in any recognizable form, and, most remarkably, no writing. A civilization capable of producing the largest known Bronze Age casting in the ancient world left no written record, no administrative texts, nothing. Or what they left is something we haven't recognized as writing yet. 2 pits were discovered in 1986. 6 more were excavated beginning in 2020. In every pit, the contents had been deliberately destroyed before burial. The bronzes were smashed, the ivories were burned, the jades were broken. And then all of it, thousands of fragments, was arranged into the pits in specific organized layers and sealed. This was not enemy looting. This was not accidental destruction. Someone systematically smashed and burned their most sacred objects, arranged the wreckage according to a plan, and sealed it into the earth with ceremony. You don't break your altar unless you are ending something permanently. The masks are what people stop at. The Sangsingdui bronze masks feature eyes that protrude outward from the face by roughly 16 inches, about the length of a standard ruler, horizontal cylinders extending outward. There is no human anatomy they could plausibly represent. No disease, no genetic condition, no cultural beauty standard produces eyes that extend outward by 1.5 feet. The largest mask stands nearly 5 feet wide. Beside it in the pits were bronze trees, the largest standing 13 feet tall, with 9 branches holding bird figures, a dragon coiled around the base. An 8-foot bronze human statue, the largest known ancient bronze casting ever found, was recovered with hands positioned as if gripping a cylindrical object. That object was never found in any pit. Whatever it was not deposited with the statue, or it was organic and decayed, or it was removed before the pit was sealed. The metallurgical problem is as significant as the iconographic one. The bronze casting at Sangsingdui, specifically the lost wax casting technique used for large multi-piece molds, requires extensive prior development. Every known Bronze Age tradition shows the progression: simple casting, then more complex, then large scale. Sangsingdui's bronzes appear fully formed. There are no developmental phases in the Chengdu Plains archaeological record. Either the knowledge arrived from somewhere outside the region, or the earlier phases have not been found. In 2021, a bronze altar was excavated from the third pit, roughly 3 feet wide, with miniature human figures clinging to its sides, their faces identical to the giant masks, surrounded by coiling dragons. Archaeologists described it as a representation of a cosmic mountain, the axis connecting the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. The altar was broken before burial, smashed, like everything else. 6 of the 8 known pits have been excavated and reported. Pit 8 has an innermost sealed chamber that has not been fully opened as of 2024. The excavation team reported in 2022 reaching a concentrically layered inner deposit, separated from surrounding material by deliberate stone placement. The contents of that layer have not been officially announced. That was more than 2 years ago. The mainstream interpretation is that Sansingdui represents the ritual practice of an ancient Shu kingdom, a regional Bronze Age state absorbed into Zhou dynasty China around 1000 BCE. The pit deposits are termination ceremonies triggered by conquest, political transition, or disaster. The unusual iconography reflects local religious traditions that diverged from Yellow River cultures. The protruding eyes represent divine sight, a supernatural visual faculty restricted to deities or the ritually empowered. What the mainstream interpretation cannot absorb is the absence of precursors. The metallurgical complexity appears without a developmental record. The iconography doesn't evolve. The civilization doesn't transition. It terminates. And what it leaves behind is sealed in the earth, smashed and burned, and includes objects that appear nowhere else in 3,000 years of Chinese archaeological record before or after. Some researchers have proposed that the pit deposits represent a deliberate religious erasure, that the Sangsingdui tradition was actively suppressed by a successor culture that considered it dangerous and wanted it sealed not just physically, but cosmologically. The objects were destroyed so they could not be reactivated. Others note that the protruding eye motif appears only on the largest ritual objects, never on ordinary items. It marks specific things as belonging to a specific category of the sacred, or the inhuman. What event, political or spiritual, caused an entire civilization to systematically destroy and bury its sacred objects simultaneously? Why do the Sangsingdui bronzes show no technological development period, appearing fully formed with no known predecessors? What was the cosmic mountain altar for, and why was it broken before burial? And what is in the sealed inner chamber of Pit 8? From the sealed pits of ancient China, we travel to South America, where beneath a temple in the Peruvian Andes, a labyrinth was designed not to trap you but to break your mind, and the most sacred chamber at its center has been sealed since archaeologists first understood what happened there. Number 3. Chavín de Huántar. Before the Inca, before the Moche, before any civilization we associate with ancient Peru, there was something at a mountain confluence in the northern Andes that people traveled hundreds of miles to reach. Not for trade, not for war, to be transformed. Chavín de Huántar sits at 10,500 feet above sea level in the Peruvian Andes, at the point where 2 rivers converge, a location that ancient Andean cosmology considered a sacred junction of worlds. Construction began around 900 BCE and continued for approximately 700 years. At its peak, the Chavan cult exerted religious influence across a territory larger than modern Peru, pulling pilgrims from the Pacific coast to the Amazon basin. Spanish traveler Pedro de Cieza de León documented the site in 1553. Serious excavation began in 1919 under Julio Tello, the founding figure of Peruvian archaeology. What Tello and later researchers found inside changed the understanding of what ancient religion looked like at its most extreme. The temple complex contains 36 distinct gallery corridors carved from stone inside a solid temple mound. They were designed to disorient. Floors slope at irregular angles. Ceilings change height without warning, forcing visitors to crouch or rise unexpectedly in total darkness. Sound behaves in ways that defy intuition. Acoustic research conducted in 2012 found that noise generated in one gallery emerges at unpredictable points elsewhere in the network. Inside the tunnels, it becomes impossible to determine the direction of any sound. You don't know if the noise is ahead of you. You don't know if it's behind you. You don't know if it's inside your own head. None of this is an accident of stone placement. These effects were apparent during construction. They were not corrected. At the center of the labyrinth, fixed into the floor in the darkness of the main gallery junction, stands the lanzone. It is a 15-foot granite monolith, carved from the stone while it was already in position. It cannot be removed without destroying it, or the surrounding walls. It has not moved in 2,500 years. The carved figure combines human and animal features, upturned fangs, clawed hands, serpent hair, the anatomy of multiple predators merged into one form. It was not placed here arbitrarily. A shaft was cut through the ceiling directly above it, connecting the main gallery to a chamber overhead. Sound generated above, including voices, enters through the shaft and descends onto the monolith below. A person standing in the dark at the center of the labyrinth, after navigating sloping floors and impossible acoustics, looks up and hears the stone speaking. Botanical analysis of residues found throughout the Chavan galleries has identified San Pedro cactus, the primary mescaline-containing plant of the Andean tradition, and vilca seeds, a DMT-containing compound used by Amazonian ritual practitioners. Both are powerful hallucinogens. Used together, in a lightless stone labyrinth where direction is impossible to judge and a carved deity appears to produce sound, the sensory experience would have been total, not incidentally, by design. John Rick, of Stanford University, who has led systematic excavations at Chavan since 1994, documented skeletal remains in several of the gallery corridors. The bones did not conform to standard burial or sacrifice patterns. They were not arranged as complete individuals. They were organized by anatomical type, femur bones here, skulls there, other elements elsewhere, not by person, by part. Something was being done with specific components of the dead, in a specific place, that no existing framework for ancient Andean ritual fully explains. The bones were sorted the way a collection is sorted. Peruvian authorities sealed several interior galleries following a 1970 earthquake that destabilized portions of the corridor system. Access to the site is restricted. The deepest galleries remain permanently closed. Researchers with special institutional permits have described carved panels in those sealed sections, placed facing the narrowest passages, visible only to a person navigating alone. Whatever those carvings were for, they were not for an audience. Mainstream Andean archaeology interprets Chavan as an oracle center and pilgrimage destination. Priests administered psychedelic compounds to pilgrims who received divinely interpreted visions. The lanzon represents the presiding deity. The acoustic properties of the galleries were recognized and deliberately enhanced. The bones in the corridors are sacrificial offerings common across Andean cultures. But Rick's bone documentation resists that category. Sacrificed individuals appear in Andean archaeology as whole bodies, articulated remains, or specific trophy components like severed heads. Sorted bones, by anatomical type across individuals, suggest something else. A practice of disaggregating bodies into components, organizing those components by category, for a purpose we have no existing framework to identify. Some researchers have proposed that Chavan functioned as a training facility for a priestly class, where candidates underwent extended periods of psychological destruction and reconstruction inside the galleries. Not a one-time pilgrimage experience, a curriculum. The 700-year duration of the Chavan cult, its collapse around 200 BCE through what appears to be abandonment rather than conquest, and the total cessation of its regional influence suggest that when this institution ended, it ended completely and deliberately. Why were human bones sorted by anatomical type and deposited in sealed gallery corridors, separated from one another as parts rather than as individuals? Was the acoustic disorientation of the labyrinth engineered from the design stage? And if so, what specific psychological effect was it built to produce? What did pilgrims receive in exchange for descending alone into total darkness, with hallucinogens and the voice of a stone god? And what specific event caused an institution operating continuously for 700 years to stop, leaving no successor and no documented reason? From the dark labyrinth of the Andes, we rise to the surface and travel north, to Mexico, where beneath a pyramid that predates the Aztec by 1,000 years, archaeologists found something sealed underground in 2014 that still has not been fully excavated. Number 4. Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. In 2003, heavy rains struck the ancient city of Teotihuacan outside Mexico City. When the water drained, workers noticed a slight depression in the ground, directly in front of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. They probed it. They found a void. Below the depression, 60 feet underground, stretching nearly 330 feet toward the center of the pyramid, was a tunnel that had been sealed for approximately 1,800 years. 6 more years passed before systematic excavation began. By 2014, the research team had mapped what the tunnel contained. The discovery was announced internationally. Then the innermost chambers were sealed by Mexican federal authorities. The announcements went quiet. They have been quiet for more than 10 years. The Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent is the third largest structure at Teotihuacan, built between 150 and 200 CE. Teotihuacan itself is one of the most genuinely unexplained cities in the ancient world. At its peak, it housed approximately 200,000 people, making it the largest city in the Western Hemisphere at that time, and one of the largest on Earth. It predates the Aztec civilization by nearly 1,000 years. No written language from Teotihuacan has been decoded. The name of the civilization that built it is unknown. When the Aztec arrived centuries after it was abandoned, they assumed gods had constructed it. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where men become gods. That name is all that survives from whoever lived there. Excavation of the tunnel was led by archaeologist Sergio Gomez of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH. Because the tunnel had been sealed for nearly 2 millennia and had unknown structural integrity, a remote-controlled robot was sent in before any human entered. The robot carried cameras, lights, and sensors. It returned with footage. What the robot found in the 3 terminal chambers required consultation before excavation continued. Liquid mercury, pooled across the floors of all 3 chambers. Large quantities, glimmering in the robot's camera lights, undisturbed for 1,800 years. Mercury does not occur naturally at Teotihuacan. The nearest cinnabar deposits, from which liquid mercury is extracted by heating ore to 674 degrees Fahrenheit, are hundreds of miles away. Transporting liquid mercury in the ancient world was logistically demanding, dangerous, and expensive. Mercury is a neurotoxin. Extended exposure causes tremors, cognitive deterioration, and death. Whoever filled these chambers knew that. They did it anyway. The closest parallel in the global archaeological record is the mausoleum of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, where ancient texts describe liquid mercury rivers flowing through an underground palace. Modern survey instruments detecting mercury vapor have confirmed significant concentrations beneath that still-sealed tomb. 2 civilizations, on opposite sides of the planet, with no documented contact, chose the same toxic liquid metal as the primary material filling their most sacred sealed underground spaces. The tunnel also contained approximately 75,000 spheres of various sizes. Many were coated in iron pyrite, the mineral known as fool's gold, which produces bright metallic reflections when lit. In Mesoamerican religious tradition, pyrite-coated objects were associated with divine sight and the night sky. Picture three chambers at the end of a 330-foot tunnel. Pools of reflective mercury on the floor, 75,000 glittering spheres across every surface, illuminated by a single torch held by a person 60 feet underground. That is not decoration, that is a constructed experience. The team also found wooden platforms or thrones, preserved as impressions in the soil. Around those thrones were skeletal remains, individuals sacrificed and placed in specific positions relative to the wooden structures. The thrones were prepared. The intended occupant was never placed. The tomb, or whatever the tunnel was built to be, was made ready and then sealed empty. In 2014, INA sealed the innermost chamber, with no public timeline for opening. No official statement has described what the robot's sensors detected inside it. Gomez has given press interviews about the tunnel's outer findings. He has not publicly addressed the inner chamber's contents. The gap between the sealing and today has now exceeded a decade. Mainstream archaeology interprets the tunnel as a symbolic representation of the underworld and the primordial sea of Mesoamerican creation mythology. The mercury represents those sacred waters. The pyrite spheres represent the star field of the cosmos. The sacrificed individuals are offerings made during the ceremony that sealed the tunnel, connected to a political transition at Teotihuacan around 200 CE. The empty thrones held organic materials or effigies that have not survived. The tunnel was not simply left after the ceremony, it was methodically sealed. Stone was carefully placed across the entrance in a manner designed to hold for millennia. The people who sealed it did not expect anyone to return. That is not a religious afterthought. That is a decision made by people who knew what they were putting in and wanted it to stay there. Some researchers have proposed that the tunnel represents a founding ritual for the entire city of Teotihuacan, a ceremony designed to anchor supernatural power into the pyramid above and into the urban complex built around it. The mercury's toxicity may have been a deliberate feature. A space where the air can kill you is a space designed for entities who don't breathe. What specifically caused INAH to seal the innermost chamber in 2014 without a public description of what the robot found? What does liquid mercury represent in a ritual context that justified transporting tons of toxic metal hundreds of miles across ancient Mexico? Why were thrones prepared for an occupant who was never placed? And what was the pyramid of the feathered serpent built to honor when the city that built it left no name? From the sealed underground chambers of Mexico's most mysterious pyramid, we travel backward across time by 400,000 years to a cave in northern Spain where the first ritual ever performed by any human ancestor was left sealed in the rock. Number 5. Cima de los Huesos. There is a cave in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain. Deep inside, past passages that require crawling in complete darkness, there is a vertical shaft dropping 43 feet straight into a chamber at the bottom. No natural light has ever reached it. No food source exists near it. No practical reason to be there. 430,000 years ago, someone carried bodies to the edge of that shaft and lowered them down, again and again, over what was probably thousands of years. And when they did it, they placed one thing in with the dead, one object. A single hand axe, roughly 12 inches long, cut from distinctive red quartzite obtained from a source miles away. Researchers named it Excalibur. The Cima de los Huesos, which translates as the Pit of Bones, was identified as significant in the 1970s and began yielding major fossil finds in the 1980s and 90s. The fossils belong to 28 individuals of the species Homo heidelbergensis, the hominin lineage ancestral to both Neanderthals and, more distantly, modern humans. They range in age from childhood to middle age. Many show healed fractures and signs of trauma, meaning they did not all die peacefully. Their age distribution and the evidence of deposits accumulated over time strongly suggests they were not killed at once. They were carried here, repeatedly, across potentially thousands of years. The Atapuerca site has produced more hominin fossils than any other location on Earth. The Cima de los Huesos is the most concentrated deposit within it, 28 individuals. A 43-foot shaft, a cave that required deliberate navigation to reach, and 0 associated animal remains. Animals do not selectively fall into pits while humans fall in separately. The people were brought here intentionally. Excalibur is what forces the question. By 430,000 BCE, hand axes were ordinary tools. Any group of Homo heidelbergensis would have had many. Choosing one axe made specifically from red quartzite, sourced from a location that required deliberate travel, and placing it alone among 28 deposited bodies, means the object was chosen for a reason that had nothing to do with its function as a cutting implement. Red quartzite was selected because it was red, or because it came from that specific place, or because of some meaning attached to both. That is the definition of symbolic thought, assigning non-functional significance to an object, choosing what something represents over what it does. Excalibur is the oldest confirmed symbolic artifact in human history. Juan Luis Arzuaga led the team that formally concluded, in a 2003 paper in the Journal of Human Evolution, that the Cima de los Huesos was an intentional mortuary deposit. The absence of animal remains, the deliberate selection of Excalibur, and the pattern of deposition over time all ruled out accidental accumulation. The conclusion is broadly accepted in mainstream paleoanthropology. This is the oldest known deliberate mortuary behavior on Earth, possibly the oldest ritual. What mainstream science does not fully resolve is the continuity. 28 individuals deposited at different times over what may have been thousands of years. That means multiple generations of Homo heidelbergensis maintained awareness of this shaft, remembered its significance, and continued the practice of bringing their dead here. Not to any convenient pit. To this one. This shaft, in this specific part of this cave, in this mountain, that requires transmitted knowledge across spans of time longer than the entire recorded history of human civilization, without writing, without language as we understand it. These were not modern humans. They did not have agriculture, cities, or religion in any documented form, and yet they maintained a specific sacred place across what may have been dozens of successive generations. The area around Excalibur's precise location at the bottom of the pit is restricted access. The Spanish Heritage Council placed the Cima de los Huesos under its highest level of heritage protection. Researchers must apply for special institutional permits to approach the specific deposit zone. The surrounding chambers of Atapuerca are actively excavated. The bottom of the Cima is managed with a degree of control that matches the most sensitive fossil sites on Earth. Some researchers have proposed that the Cima de los Huesos is evidence that grief, the emotional response to the death of individuals who mattered, predates modern humans by hundreds of thousands of years. If Homo heidelbergensis experienced loss in a way that motivated, deliberate, repeated, multi-generational mortuary behavior, then empathy and some form of spiritual impulse may not be products of civilization. They may be biologically embedded, inherited from ancestors who stood at the edge of a 43-foot shaft in complete darkness and decided it was where the dead belonged. Others have noted that the tradition persisted longer than most modern nations have existed. Whatever knowledge was transmitted about this shaft's significance survived without any cultural infrastructure we typically associate with religious continuity. How did hominins, who lacked language as we understand it, develop symbolic thinking advanced enough to assign meaning to a specific object and a specific underground location, and then transmit that meaning intact across thousands of years? What did the color red mean to the people who traveled miles to source Excalibur from red quartzite? Did the same community return over centuries, or did multiple groups across millennia converge on the same shaft independently? And what else lies unexcavated at the bottom of the Cima de los Huesos? From the deepest origins of ritual in northern Spain, we leap forward 428,000 years to the center of what is now Mexico City, where workers struck a buried wall in 1978 and found an entire pyramid waiting beneath the capital, complete with a sealed chamber containing an arrangement no textbook had prepared them for. Number 6. The Templo Mayor. On February 21, 1978, workers laying electrical cables in the historic center of Mexico City struck stone with a drill. The stone was enormous, more than 10 feet in diameter, covered in carved reliefs. They called archaeologists. What archaeologists identified was the Coyolxauhqui stone, a 3-ton circular disc depicting the Aztec moon goddess dismembered, her body severed at the joints. Behind it, buried under 4.5 centuries of colonial rubble and construction, was the Templo Mayor, the main pyramid of the Aztec Empire, the center of the world as the Aztec understood it. Forgotten under a modern capital city for 457 years. The Templo Mayor was built in the 14th century at the heart of Tenochtitlan and expanded 7 consecutive times, each version built directly over the previous one. At its height, it rose 148 feet. Spanish conquistadors demolished it in 1521 and used the stone for Mexico City's cathedral, which stands today less than 100 feet from where the pyramid once rose. Then it was buried and forgotten, until a drill found it. Excavations led by the Great Temple Project since 1978 have produced one of the largest caches of ritual material from any site in the Americas. The Templo Mayor was not a ceremonial space used occasionally. It was the site of continuous, institutionalized, calendrically precise sacrifice conducted according to the 365-day Aztec solar year, with specific offerings required on specific dates. Tens of thousands of individual artifacts have been recovered: skeletal remains of humans, jaguars, eagles, and fish, obsidian blades, gold figurines, coral from both the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific, brought through trade networks spanning thousands of miles. The altar at the summit was in active use for approximately 200 consecutive years. In 2022, excavation directed by archaeologist Leonardo Lopez Lujan reached a sealed stone cist, a stone-lined box, positioned directly in front of the main altar platform. When the cist was opened, it contained a complete jaguar skeleton, arranged in a warrior's posture, wearing a turquoise mosaic collar, flanked by the remains of a golden eagle. Beside the sealed box, arranged in a perfect circle, were 42 children's skulls facing outward. All were between 2 and 7 years old. All showed evidence of ritual killing during the dry season, the period in the Aztec calendar associated with Tlaloc, the rain deity, to whom children's tears were offered as intercessory prayer for rainfall. The circular arrangement of 42 outward-facing children's skulls has no known parallel in Mesoamerican archaeology. None. Lopez Lujan described the configuration as a cosmic boundary, a ring of the dead forming a perimeter around whatever was placed at the center. The sealed stone box was located at the exact center of that circle. The box was placed after the skulls were arranged, not before. The children were positioned first. The box was set among them last. The contents of the sealed cist at the center of the skull circle have not been publicly described as of 2024. Lopez Lujan's team announced the discovery in October 2022. No follow-up statement has identified the objects inside. Mexican authorities have cited ongoing conservation analysis. In 2006, the discovery of the massive Tlaltecutli relief beneath the Templo Mayor required 5 years before full publication. That precedent exists. But this is not a stone relief. This is a sealed box at the center of a circle of children, on an altar the Aztec believed was the literal center of the universe. Mainstream Aztec scholarship is unambiguous about what the Templo Mayor represented. The pyramid embodied the cosmic mountain at the axis of the world, with the altar at its summit as the point where human action could reach the gods. Children offered to Tlaloc were understood as divine intercessors, their tears and suffering ensuring the rainfall that sustained agriculture and life. The circular skull arrangement corresponds to a cosmological diagram, possibly a calendar cycle or a mythological moment in Aztec creation accounts. The cist contains elite offerings to earth or underworld deities. But the precision of 42 deaths resists the category of religious sentiment. The children are distributed evenly by estimated age and apparent sex. The cause and method of death is consistent across the deposit. This was not spontaneous. This was organized the way a production process is organized. Someone acquired 42 children from across the empire, killed them at the calendrically correct moment in the correct manner, and arranged their skulls in a geometrically precise outward-facing circle with the attention of a craftsman completing a structural element. The circle is designed to hold something at its center. Whatever is in the sealed stone box sits exactly where Aztec cosmology places the axis mundi, the point where all planes of existence intersect: heaven, earth, underworld. The box was placed there last, surrounded and protected by 42 dead children. The thing inside the box is at the center of that protection. Some researchers have proposed that the skull circle encodes an astronomical cycle, with 42 elements corresponding to a specific interval in Aztec calendrical astronomy. Others connect the outward-facing configuration to the Aztec myth of the first sunrise, where the gods formed a protective ring to ensure the sun would move. What was inside the sealed stone box at the center of the skull circle? What astronomical or cosmological event did the outward-facing arrangement mark or contain? How many more sealed chambers remain beneath the Templo Mayor, unexcavated beneath Mexico City's streets? And who were the 42 children, and how far across the empire were they gathered to die? From the sealed stone chambers beneath Mexico City, we travel east across the Atlantic to ancient Mesopotamia, where an archaeologist, digging in the 1920s, uncovered a room full of women who had walked in alive and never came back out. Number 7. Royal Cemetery of Ur. In 1928, British archaeologist Leonard Woolley was excavating the ancient Sumerian city of Ur in what is now southern Iraq when his team broke through into a sealed chamber. Inside was a woman buried with extraordinary wealth. Elaborate golden headdresses, lapis lazuli jewelry, a golden drinking cup, a lyre inlaid with gold and shell. But what stopped Woolley was not the jewelry. It was the 52 people buried with her, and specifically the way they had died. The attendants in Queen Puabi's tomb had not been placed there after death. They had died where they lay. Woolley recognized this from the positions, orderly rows, full regalia, as though they had sat down and simply stopped. Their cups were still beside them. Residue remained in those cups. The burial chamber had been sealed from the outside. What Woolley was looking at was a room in which 52 people had entered alive, sat in position, died, and then had their door closed by someone who was not dying that day. The Royal Cemetery of Ur operated between approximately 2600 and 2450 BCE during the first dynasty of Ur. This was one of the earliest complex civilizations on Earth, the society that produced the world's first written law codes, some of the world's first literature, and the world's first administrative bureaucracy. Woolley's team excavated more than 2,000 individual burials at the site over a decade, beginning in 1922. Of those, 16 were royal graves distinguished by scale and by what Woolley called retainer burials, people who died alongside the primary individual. The largest retainer deposit Woolley uncovered was what he designated the Great Death Pit. It contained 74 people. The majority were women. They were arranged in 6 rows across a large rectangular chamber. They wore their finest regalia, golden headdresses with lapis lazuli and carnelian, beaded cloaks, silver earrings, necklaces, silver ribbons, still arranged on their heads as though freshly placed. Several held objects, a silver ribbon, a small vessel, an instrument. One woman's hands were positioned on the strings of her lyre. The strings were gone, decayed over 4,500 years. Her hands were still above where they had been, frozen in the last position she chose or was placed in. In 2009, toxicologist Patrick McGovern analyzed residues from the cups found beside the bodies. His analysis identified traces consistent with a concentrated alcoholic beverage, possibly wine combined with botanical additives. McGovern proposed the attendants consumed a sedative compound that induced unconsciousness and then death. His findings are the most widely accepted explanation for 74 people dying peacefully in an enclosed space with no signs of violence or restraint. They drank something. It killed them. Whether they knew it would, or chose it willingly, or were given no actual choice, is a question the cups cannot answer. Puabi's tomb was found with its entrance sealed by 6 feet of clay placed from the outside. The seal had not been disturbed since the day it was applied. Inside were 52 attendants, 2 wooden sledges with their oxen and drivers, and more than 3,000 individual artifacts, the largest single-context Sumerian material cache ever recovered. The wood of the sledges had long since decayed, but left precise impressions in the hardened soil. Woolley reconstructed the entire scene from soil staining and impressions, the position of every body, every vehicle, every object. Mainstream Sumerology views the retainer burials as voluntary practice. Servants who had dedicated their lives to a royal household may have understood accompanying their ruler into death as obligation or honor. The peaceful postures support willing participation. The Sumerians produced extensive written records on nearly every aspect of their society and left no text condemning or explicitly describing the retainer burials as coercive. But the sealed door is the detail that changes the reading. In the Great Death Pit and in Puabi's tomb, the entrance was controlled from outside, in every case. Whatever the attendants believed when they entered, whether they were conscious, unconscious, willing, or not, The architecture ensured they could not leave. The person who closed the door was not in the room. And 74 doses of the same compound, distributed in an organized ceremony, does not happen spontaneously. Someone prepared those cups. Someone distributed them in sequence. Someone waited for the result, walked out, and sealed the entrance. The logistics of the Great Death Pit describe a planned, rehearsed operation with someone managing it from beginning to end. Among the royal graves, Woolley documented, one designated PG 1237 in his field records, was found sealed but not fully excavated during his campaign. Woolley noted evidence of significant wealth visible through the sealed entrance, but chose to preserve it for future methods and technology. Whether PG 1237 has been formally opened and published since is not established in any publicly accessible literature. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad, which holds the primary Ur collection, has not confirmed the current status of that tomb. Some researchers have proposed that the retainer sacrifice mythology of willing service was constructed retrospectively by scribes to legitimize a practice that was, in practice, coercive. Others have noted that the timing of the most elaborate royal burials correlates with periods of drought and famine in the Mesopotamian climate record, suggesting the sacrifices may have had a cosmological dimension beyond royal service, an attempt to address catastrophe through maximum ritual expenditure. What did the 74 people in the Great Death Pit believe was going to happen to them? Was the sealed door a mercy or a sentence? What is inside the still unconfirmed royal tomb PG 1237? And why did the civilization that invented written law and recorded everything leave no written explanation for this? From the sealed royal tombs of ancient Mesopotamia, we cross 1,000 miles and 5,000 years to central Turkey, where a city of 8,000 people built their homes directly on top of their dead and kept the skulls of their ancestors plastered into the walls. Number 8. Catalhoyuk. There is a Neolithic city in central Turkey where the dead never really left. Between 7500 and 5700 BCE, approximately 8,000 people lived in a densely packed cluster of mud brick structures on the Konya Plain. No streets, no alleyways, no pathways between buildings of any kind. Every structure was built wall to wall with the ones around it, a continuous connected mass with one single way in, a hole in the roof. You descended by ladder into your living space, and beneath the floor where you slept, directly below the platform where you laid your head every night, were your family's dead. Catalhoyuk was discovered by British archaeologist James Mellart in 1958 during a survey of the Konya Plain and briefly excavated in the 1960s before closing amid controversy. Ian Hodder of Cambridge University reopened the site in 1993 and has led interdisciplinary excavations since. The modern program has significantly expanded and in some cases contradicted Mellart's original conclusions. The settlement covers 33 acres and contains an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 individual structures distributed across 14 distinct occupation levels, each built directly on top of the previous one, across approximately 1,800 years of continuous habitation. Population at peak occupation, around 7,000 BCE, is estimated at 8,000 people, making Catalhoyuk one of the largest human settlements on Earth at that time. It predates writing. It predates the pottery wheel. It predates metal. And it sustained itself for nearly 2 millennia in a form that shows no major structural change, the same no-door, roof entry architecture from the first level to the last, the same practice of burying the dead beneath the living quarters. The burial practice was consistent across the entire settlement and across all 14 levels. People were buried beneath the floors of their homes, specifically beneath the sleeping and working platforms inside the main room. In some houses, excavation has revealed up to 30 burials beneath a single floor, representing multiple generations of the same household. The dead and the living shared the same physical space, not symbolically, not in spirit, with approximately 12 inches of clay between them. Specific rooms within the settlement show evidence of intensified ritual use. These rooms contain bucrania, bull skulls mounted directly into the plaster walls with the horns exposed, arranged sometimes in rows, sometimes in geometric configurations. The floors were replastered repeatedly with layers of paint in spiral and handprint patterns. And in some rooms, individual skulls were removed from previously interred bodies after burial, sometimes years after, and had their faces rebuilt in fresh plaster to recreate the appearance of the person in life. The reconstructed faces were then kept in the living space, sometimes for decades, before being reinterred or moved. In 2021, bioarchaeologist Scott Hattow's excavation team at Catalhoyuk identified a sealed room, accessible from an adjacent structure, with no evidence of any domestic function. Inside were 18 skulls arranged in a deliberate spatial pattern. Several showed precise cut marks at the base, where the skull meets the spine. The marks are consistent with decapitation performed with a sharp instrument while soft tissue was still present, meaning these skulls were taken from recently dead bodies, not from skeletal remains that had already aged. The room was sealed beneath a layer of purpose-built clay flooring laid over the deposit. It was designed to hold what was placed inside it. Mainstream archaeologists interpret Catalhoyuk's mortuary practices as ancestor veneration, a system maintaining physical proximity between the living and their lineage. The plastered skulls are interpreted as family relics, kept for ritual purposes, consistent with similar practices at early Neolithic sites across the Near East. The bucrania represent fertility and power symbolism, documented broadly across Neolithic Europe and Anatolia. The 2021 skull room is interpreted as a communal ritual deposit of community members, possibly associated with a specific transition in the settlement's history. But the ancestor veneration framework explains why you would keep a skull. It does not explain why 18 skulls from 18 recently dead individuals were removed in close temporal proximity, arranged together in a specific pattern, and sealed under a purpose-built floor in a room with no other function. Family relics are individual. A family keeps one skull, or the skulls of its own dead. 18 skulls from 18 different people collected together, arranged and sealed in a purpose-built room is an institution. Someone operated this space for a function that required a collection of recently dead people's skulls, organized by someone who did it routinely enough to have developed a standardized decapitation method. The cut marks are the detail that matters. Consistent location, consistent angle, consistent depth, not improvised, practiced. Some researchers have proposed that Catalhoyuk's entire built environment was designed to make death spatially inseparable from life, that the no-door, roof entry architecture, the burials below the sleeping platforms, the skull rooms, were not incidental features of the settlement, but the organizing principle of it. The relationship between the living and the dead was what the city was for. Others have suggested that the sealed skull room served as a community-level facility, shared across households, used for practices associated with death and transition that were too specific, too concentrated, or too dangerous to occur in domestic space. What specific function required 18 freshly decapitated skulls to be arranged together and sealed in a dedicated room? Why did 8,000 people maintain the same architectural system, including sleeping above their dead, without modification across 1,800 continuous years? What rites were performed in the rooms marked by bull skulls and repainted geometric floors? And what happened around 5700 BCE that caused one of the world's largest settlements to be quietly and completely abandoned? From a city where the dead lived beneath the living in central Turkey, we travel west to France, where humanity's oldest mystery story is painted in a cave sealed from the public since 1963, in a room that requires a rope to reach. Number 9. Lascaux Cave. On September 12, 1940, 4 teenagers and their dog were exploring the woods near Montignac in the Dordogne region of France. The dog disappeared into a hole in the ground. The teenagers followed. They lowered themselves down with an oil lamp. Every wall around them was covered in paintings. Horses at full gallop, aurochs turning to charge, deer swimming across a river, 500 individual animals, rendered with an understanding of anatomy, movement, and depth that would not reappear in European art for another 16,000 years. The Lascaux cave paintings were made approximately 17,000 years ago during the Magdalenian period of the Upper Paleolithic. The cave was open to the public in 1948 and drew crowds of up to 1,200 visitors per day by the mid-1950s. By 1955, CO2 and moisture from human breath had begun altering the cave's chemistry. White calcite spread across the painted surfaces. Green algae colonized the walls. In 1963, French culture minister André Malraux closed Lascaux permanently to public access. Only a handful of researchers with institutional authorization enter each month. The restriction has held for over 60 years. The cave system contains more than 600 paintings and nearly 1,500 engravings across multiple interconnected galleries. Horses, bison, aurochs, deer, bear, rhinoceros, abstract signs. The visual world of Lascaux is almost entirely non-human. There is one exception. The exception is in the shaft. The shaft is a vertical drop of approximately 16 feet, accessible from the apse above only by descending a rope. It connects to no other gallery. It has no practical use. At the bottom, the space is cramped, the ceiling low, and it can hold perhaps 2 or 3 people. Someone 17,000 years ago descended into it with paint, a lamp, and tools, and painted a single scene on the wall. One scene. In a place that required deliberate effort and commitment to reach. In that scene, a bison stands facing left. It has been speared. Its entrails are visible, hanging from a wound in its flank. Below the bison, a human figure falls backward. Unlike every animal in the cave, the human is drawn schematically, spare and angular. He has the head of a bird. His hands have 4 fingers. His arms are outstretched. Beside him, planted in the ground, is a simple pole with a bird perched on top of it. To the left, a rhinoceros walks away. This is the only human figure in all of Lascaux, and it is dying. The shaft is sealed with a physical barrier. No member of the public has ever entered it. Access currently requires institutional affiliation, a formal application, permit approval, and technical review. Fewer than a dozen people are estimated to have been physically present in the shaft in the last 10 years. The justification is the chamber's specific chemical sensitivity to human presence. It is also the most unexplained location in the most scrutinized cave art site in the world, and the two facts are not unrelated. The mainstream interpretation of the shaft scene is a hunting narrative. The bison was speared, the man was gored, the rhinoceros was present and has moved off. The bird-headed appearance of the human reflects a limitation in how Paleolithic artists depicted human faces compared to animal faces, a consistent observation across European cave art, where animal imagery is consistently more skilled and detailed than human imagery. The pole with the bird may be a spear thrower or a ritual staff, function unknown. The scene records a dangerous encounter and the death of a man. But descending a 16-foot rope to paint a single image in a location no one passing through the cave would encounter refutes a hunting record. You don't memorialize a hunting accident in a space that requires specific effort to reach and that no one is likely to find. You choose that space because the inaccessibility is the point. Belgian researcher Sophie de Boon, analyzing Paleolithic imagery associated with shamanic practice in 2009, noted that the shaft at Lascaux has features consistent with anthropological descriptions of initiation sites, extreme difficulty of access, imagery discontinuous with the surrounding visual context, and complete physical isolation from the areas of ordinary activity. Bird-headed human figures appear at multiple Paleolithic sites across Europe and Siberia and are specifically associated by researchers with shamanic iconography, practitioners depicted in states of ritual transformation, entering altered consciousness, represented as a merger between human and animal identity. The pole, with a bird on top, parallels spirit poles documented in ethnographic records across Siberia. Siberian shamanism often depicting the practitioner's spirit bird perched above. The rhinoceros walking away is not a bystander. In multiple ancient symbolic systems, an animal departing after a death scene represents the withdrawal of ordinary reality. If the shaft was an initiation or vision space, the scene at its bottom was not a hunting accident. It was a specific cosmological event, the death and transformation of a practitioner, that mattered enough to place in the hardest-to-reach location in the cave. We have the image. The story it depicts has not survived anywhere else. What specific belief or practice required an artist to descend a rope into the dark to paint one image no one would easily find? Why is the only human figure in Lascaux dying, and why does its head belong to a bird, while every other Paleolithic human figure nearby is faceless or absent? What is the pole with the bird, and what function did it serve in whatever the shaft was used for? And are there sealed or inaccessible sections of Lascaux containing images that have not yet been catalogued or published? From the sealed depths of France's most famous cave, we travel south and east to Egypt, where a pharaoh's temple contains symbols that no known Egyptian stoneworking method should have been able to produce, and a restricted section of its hypostyle hall has been off-limits since discoveries in the 1990s. Number 10. Temple of Seti I. In the mid-1990s, a retired British engineer visiting the Temple of Seti I at Abydos photographed something on the ceiling of a column bay in the hypostyle hall. The image circulated on early internet forums. Egyptologists dismissed it, but the question it raised has not gone away because the feature that matters is not the one most people focus on. The Temple of Seti I was built around 1280 BCE at Abydos in Upper Egypt. Abydos was the most sacred location in ancient Egypt, believed to be the burial place of Osiris, god of the dead and resurrection. Pharaohs made pilgrimages there. Ordinary Egyptians traveled hundreds of miles to have their bodies interred near it. The site had been considered sacred for thousands of years before Seti chose to build there. It may be the oldest continuously sacred location on Earth. The temple is architecturally unique in one specific way. Nearly all Egyptian temples are built on a linear axis. The Temple of Seti I has an L-shaped floor plan. No other pharaonic temple has this shape. That L was built to accommodate something already at the site. The temple was designed around a structure that was already there, that the builders apparently considered too significant to demolish or incorporate into the new building. What the Temple of Seti I was built around is the Osirion. The Osirion is a massive subterranean granite structure located directly behind the main temple, partially buried and partially submerged in groundwater. It was first excavated by British archaeologists Edward Neville and Margaret Murray, beginning in 1902. The main chamber consists of enormous, undecorated granite monoliths supporting equally massive lintels, assembled without mortar, in an architectural style completely unlike anything else Seti I built. Seti's other temples are limestone, covered floor to ceiling with painted hieroglyphic reliefs and detailed mythological imagery. The Osirion uses 100-ton granite blocks with no decoration at all, no inscriptions on the megaliths themselves, no imagery. The style matches rough-fitted megalithic construction found at sites in Peru and Lebanon, not dynastic Egypt. Geologist Robert Schoch, who proposed a revised date for the Great Sphinx based on water erosion patterns in the enclosure rock, examined the Osirion in 1997. He found the same water-weathering signatures on the Osirion's granite that he identified at the Sphinx enclosure. Erosion patterns produced by prolonged heavy rainfall, of the kind that ended in Egypt around 5000 BCE. In the current desert climate, such weathering would require either extreme antiquity or precipitation that has not fallen in thousands of years. Schoch proposed that the Osirion may predate Seti I's reign by thousands of years, possibly predating dynastic Egypt entirely. If that is correct, the Temple of Seti I was built around a structure whose builders are unknown and whose construction cannot be attributed to any pharaoh. The feature the British engineer photographed in the 1990s is not the Osirion. It is a section of the hypostyle hall ceiling containing a cluster of overlapping circles forming a specific geometric pattern known as the flower of life, circles of equal diameter, each centered on the circumference of adjacent circles, producing an interlocking web. The same pattern appears in multiple ancient contexts across the world, in Roman mosaic floors, in 6th century BCE Japanese temples, in medieval European sacred geometry. At Abydos, what is notable is not the pattern but how it was made. The Abydos circles are not carved into the granite. They are not painted on the granite. They appear to have been produced by high-temperature application to the stone surface, fused or burned into the granite rather than incised or applied. The depth of the marks, the uniformity of the lines, and the complete absence of carving tool marks have led multiple researchers who examined them in person to describe them as thermally produced. Engineer Alan Alford measured and photographed the marks in 1998 and concluded they were produced by a process with no known ancient Egyptian equivalent. Standard Egyptian stoneworking involved copper chisels, diorite hammerstones, and sand abrasives. None of these techniques produce fused, thermally altered lines in granite. Access to the section of the hypostyle hall containing the flower of life marks has been restricted by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. The stated reason is preservation. Egyptian Egyptologists have described the marks as painted in published materials, despite photographic records that contradict that description. No peer-reviewed analysis of the mark's production method has been published. A separate set of hieroglyphs in the hypostyle hall has drawn more popular attention under the label of the Abydos helicopter. Carvings that appear, from a specific angle, to show a helicopter, submarine, tank, and aircraft. The Egyptological explanation for these is well-documented palimpsest. Seti I inscribed the original cartouches. Ramesses II later plastered over sections and inscribed his own name. The plaster partially eroded over millennia, exposing both layers simultaneously. The overlapping imagery creates shapes that superficially resemble modern vehicles from a specific viewing angle. This explanation is supported by analysis of the cartouche content and is almost certainly correct. The vehicles are an optical accident, produced by time. The flower of life marks are not that. They are not two layers of text producing an accidental image. They are lines burned or fused into granite by an unknown process, in a location now restricted by the governing authority of the country that contains them. Mainstream Egyptology interprets the flower of life symbols as painted geometric decoration consistent with Egyptian ornamentation traditions, attributing their thermally fused appearance to paint chemistry or surface preparation. The Osirion is interpreted as Seti I's deliberate architectural imitation of primordial ancient construction, a stylistic choice meant to evoke the mythological time of creation. The L-shaped temple plan accommodated the Osirian because both were designed together. But Seti I built 6 other temples across Egypt. None of them uses this construction style. None of them uses undecorated 100-ton granite monoliths. None of them shows water erosion patterns suggesting extreme age. If the Osirian was a deliberate stylistic choice, it is a style Seti used once and then abandoned entirely. Some researchers have proposed that Abydos was sacred before Egypt was Egypt, that its importance predates dynastic religion by thousands of years, and that the Osirion is a remnant of whatever originally made it sacred. The New Kingdom Egyptians may have found the Osirion already there and incorporated it into the mythology of Osiris because it was too ancient and too significant to explain any other way. Seti built his temple around it for the same reason you build a cathedral around a much older altar, because the original thing is what makes the location holy. What technique produced the flower of life marks in the restricted section of the hypostyle hall, and why does it not match any documented Egyptian stoneworking method? Why did Seti I build his temple around the Osirian rather than over it? And what do its water erosion patterns tell us about how old it actually is? What made Abydos Egypt's most sacred city thousands of years before the religion that formalized that explanation was written down? From Malta's underground resonance chamber to China's sealed bronze pits, from Peru's psychedelic labyrinth to Mexico's mercury-filled tunnel, from Spain's pit of the oldest dead to Mexico City's skull circle, from Ur's sealed death room to Turkey's city of bones beneath the living, from France's sealed shaft with the dying shaman to Egypt's restricted hall with burned geometry. Across 10 ritual sites, on 6 continents, across 430,000 years, the same pattern emerges. Whoever built these spaces understood that the experience of ritual required specific conditions: darkness, isolation, specific frequencies of sound, specific chemistry, specific geometry, specific objects chosen for what they represented rather than what they did. They engineered those conditions with deliberate precision. When they were finished, they sealed what they had made, in stone, in clay, in earth, sometimes for thousands of years. The sealed chambers and restricted sections exist for various reasons. Some are preservation, some are institutional. Some, as researchers who have worked these sites will acknowledge if you ask them directly, are because what was found inside has not yet been fully understood, not just unpublished, not understood. Subscribe for more. If this made you see history differently, hit like. Drop a comment with where in the world you're watching from. We'll be back with more places that shouldn't exist.